Actually, it's about 7,000 miles an hour. They've got about 30 million and they're on air for about 4,000 hours. So it's even less. It's a very efficient.
Well, I actually used the Te Mangapahu figures, which were the grants that they'd made for the hours produced. So that's where I drew my arithmetic from.
Do we know roughly what their finances look like in terms of their revenue streams?
Well, TMP has about a $30 million grant.
Yeah, 34 million.
Yeah, and advertising is very small. It's most probably only just seven figures.
Right.
But they are very, very efficient as producers, and I definitely think they're a component of public service television.
And I was asked once what was the return on the investment that New Zealand On Air made, and why we didn't accumulate reserves. And I had to point out that actually we were a funding body, and if we ended up in the year with nothing in the bank and programs being funded and made, that was the real objective.
Yeah.
I found it a bit difficult.
In the case of Maori television, is that substantial government grant politically protected? So is it, for example, part of the coalition agreement between the Maori Party and the national-led government?
There's a court decision establishing Maori television, and that, I guess, is the bedrock. But I actually have the view now that no government could roll back on it. I don't think that you have to make it part of the coalition. I imagine they might have, but I just don't see any party in power rolling back on it.
No one could do it. If it's not there in word, it's there in deed.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can do that now. And the issue here, I think, is that, as you said, communities form around shared experience. Terry will know this as well. I mean, I spend most of my day on the internet, which is non-demand medium, but there is still a power in the shared experience of hearing and seeing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
I also think there's something you can't get when you go to your social club. You don't get the diversity of view. You don't get the diversity of experience. You get like talking to like. And sure, they can have vicious disputes within that community, but at the same time, in terms of looking at it in the broader context of how do you build social cohesion and engagement in the community at large, you don't achieve it within that structure. You get like with like, and by and large, anybody comes to challenge, by God, there'll be total unity, and you can expect everybody to certainly turn around and aggressively defend the turf. But the rest of the time, I guess, yes, they have their arguments, but they're internal. And they're about issues which we need to see a common ground where we meet and we air our differences and we discuss them in a tolerant, civilised fashion, and we reach consensus about how we're going to conduct ourselves. I think that's the real purpose of public broadcasting services, and that's the distinction. It's got a social and cultural mission, which is above and beyond the consideration of the purely commercial. Now, I think there's got to be room for both. Don't get me wrong. We've got to have both. That's the point.
Terry.
I'm just interested in a comment coming through there from Wellington Access Radio. Social media won't save spoken language, and my colleagues here are mostly focused on television. But you know, our first communication and our most ubiquitous communication is that we talk to each other, and that language is is where culture resides. And when people can hear their own language, hear their own literature, hear their own music, speak the things that are familiar to them, this is a place of cohesion. And the web is, sure, there's audio on the web, and as long as people are tuning in for that spoken component, great. But social media, as that comment is made there, is not the place that you're going to hear spoken language.
Yeah. That comment actually loops back brilliantly to the week before last when we were discussing Pacific languages, because it was very clear that most of those Pacific languages are really stuck in terms of failing to generate new words, new language to keep up with what's going on in the world. And it's not helped apparently by the likes of the Tongan government, blatantly disregarding Tongan language. The Tongan government website is apparently the largest repository of Tongan language, and the government doesn't really support that. So that sense that that spoken word is very much a part of the living culture. I think it's a very crucial one.
Rod, just a word here for SBS in Australia, which I think is a shining example of multilingual outreach, because if you go to their website, A, it's huge, B, it's in multiple languages, and they're already doing things like using Twitter in multiple languages for all their listening communities. So it's not as if social media is incompatible with that. The internet doesn't have to be in English.
That's right. Just chance for a couple more comments from yes, gentleman there. Thanks very much. I'll get a microphone to you. There we go. Thanks.
Which one of us is going first?
I'll come to you afterwards. So, thanks. Yep.
My high point was discovering TVNZ 6 and 7, and because I'm a parent of 2 young children, and being able to chuck them in front of TVNZ 6 children's programs while I made dinner was incredibly useful, because I don't really want them to watch advertising and be subject to all the brands that come through the advertising and on some of the programs. So that was an amazing high point, and then of course I discovered through that TVNZ 6 and 7 and just what wonderful channels they were and how good they were for adults as well. So, and then I guess the low point really is to come when, well, one of the low points was when 6 closed down, and we were left back to DVDs or Dora, which is not New Zealand. We don't have any New Zealand DVDs that we can play them, and then the forthcoming demise of TVNZ 7.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I would agree with Peter actually about TV news in New Zealand. I too suffered from the horrors when I first saw it. I say thank God for streaming the BBC World News. I think that SBS has been mentioned as a model. I think that's good. My preferred model for funding actually is a license fee, because it guarantees you have a large amount of money to play with. However, I think that one might also consider looking at the American model with PBS and NPR. In extremis, let us say, in extremis, but the American model with a small government grant and a mix of foundations and subsidies and sponsorship does actually allow a pretty good standard of stuff to go out on national public radio and on the public broadcasting system in the States. And, if one has to move to that model, so be it. And in fact, given this government's attitude towards public broadcasting, I think it may be one that we may have to save. I'm a big fan of Concert FM, and I'd hate to lose that, but the amount of material on that comes out of NPR, which is funded by sponsorships and what have you, is amazing. So I think there are a number of models that we can look at which might be compatible with what's going on here.
Thank you. Thank you for raising a couple of models there, but I'm going to start with that point about this is a government that doesn't care about public broadcasting, and go back to that sort of, I'm going to try and get a binary sort of yes/no answer here. Is there any mileage in trying to persuade the government or hold out for a change of government to try and keep existing models going, or should we just move on? Any thoughts on that?
I'd comment on that. I actually think that the existing power brokers have kind of completely missed that there has been a shift in power. For the, in a whole holistic world view, there is a shift in power that we're seeing perhaps the downsides of in things like the Arab Spring, down and up. It's been expressed fairly violently and aggressively at the moment, but you've got your camps in Madrid trying to communicate peacefully with the government there of 250,000 people camped and saying, we want futures and so on. But I think it's all the way through the system. With the tool of the internet, I don't think it was created by the internet, but I think with the tools of the internet and new media, that people have shifted to having their own view. I'm thinking of Otto Scharmer, who's in the business school at MIT and runs the Presencing Institute, refers to the rise of civic sector has changed the geometry of power, involving stakeholder negotiation and dialogue, that there is a different source of power, namely public opinion. And if the politicians still have the kind of top-down view that it's up to them to decide whether these things happen or not, I'm sorry, it's already bypassed them. It's already happening in the new media, and traditional media is feeding into that in whole new ways and behaving as a generator of content. And I think people quite often think, oh, you know, radio could just as easily be on the internet, or television could all be on YouTube. No, because that isn't going to actually generate the content. The traditional media generates 24/7, and the new media is able to disperse it. And we can bypass all of the editors and the power brokers and the egos that run traditional media structures.
Can I just say one thing? And that is, sitting and waiting is not an option. Absolutely not an option. There are 15 regional channels in New Zealand that will probably have no future whatsoever after the DSO takes place. Why is that? Because the only transmission system that actually suits their purpose is digital terrestrial transmission, which enables them to segment the country regionally. The satellites don't do that. What's the difficulty? Do you know how many New Zealand homes have actually adopted digital terrestrial television? All of 15%. They have a tough enough time today. Tomorrow, next year, they will have an even tougher time. Now, it's not a future I'm willing to sit back passively and accept. And I think that if you care about the issues and you care about the principles, you've got to move. Yes, it might be hard to have an argument with the government of the day. Waiting for another one is not an option in my view. You must commence to engage. Don't expect them to have all the ideas in the world. They won't.
Yeah.
You know?
I certainly agree. I think waiting for the government of the day also suggests that a change in government can take away what you have. If you want to put an institution in place that's got longevity and will continue through everything, then you have to start to make the moves yourself. You can't wait.
Right. So we're going to.
What's your solution to that, David? To the fact that when digital switchover happens, the number of households, is 15%.
I have no.
So are you going to require Sky to make a certain amount of transponder space available, or? Well, what is the solution?
Yes, there can be a system by which you aggregate regional content into a single channel for nationwide distribution, so you get regions talking to nation, but you get a regional perspective on the issues of the day. You get regional issues being elevated to the national plane. You get a situation where nation talks back to the regions, and that's important. We've got a wonderful way and a whole range of multimedia tools and approaches now to interact at a national level, at a local level, at a regional level. There are things we can do. Broadband internet is going to be another problem. 75% coverage of ultra-fast broadband. It's not enough. That's not enough coverage. One of the principles of public broadcasting services is that they are universally accessible. We've lost it. The only universally accessible form of broadcasting is the satellite, and the only manner in which it serves the community is on a nationwide basis. Big issue.
Yeah.